Ba-da-da-ding, dong, ding, dong. Ba-da-da-doon, da-dee-da-ding. Ba-da-da-dee, da-da-da-dee. Ba-da-da-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Oh. Ba-da-da. Diddly-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Hello. How are we doing, everyone? Now, before anyone thinks I'm being rude, I'm not being rude. I'm quickly making sure to share. Now it's all working. The people who should be shared with. Now, I've had fun today. I have to admit, I have had one of the most stressful days I think you can possibly have as a modern person. And that was, my computer decided that it hadn't, well, Microsoft Update hadn't gone well on it. And I had to back up and get everything because it looked like it lost everything. I sorted it all out. But, that was fun. Luckily, I have got everything backed up, so I wasn't worried about losing things per se. Although that would surely have been quite high up the annoying scale of things that could have happened. But, oh, thank you, Bill Legit. But it was problematic. Hey, it's charging. That's cute. That's got my phone on charge because my phone was about to die. Thank you, Belchridge, or rather Richard. Old Richard. Hello, everyone. Let's see. Now, today's discussion is the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 and Naval and Land Operations, proposed by Jeff Beeler. And it's a really cool one to get in. And you will notice later that there is a long patrol being scheduled for a long time in the future, actually. So I can add in more. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Stav Thompson. Well, rather busy here today. Short-handed. 2 co-workers remote working now. Good luck. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Rick Vavasava. Hello, Pep Manta. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. And Matthias Slavic. Hello, everyone. Hello, Albert Sasky. Shumi. Now, the reason I'm now calling you Shumi because it's SHOOOTME, so that's no longer Shumi, that's Shumi, I reckon. Hello, Tom Golding. Hello, Carl van Gasbeck. We almost missed the Polish-Hungarian Friendship Day, 23rd of March. Now, I have to apologise because this week's earlier video, the Long Patrol, and the question-answer videos, which I was going to put up this week, haven't gone up literally because I've just been that busy dealing with final details for a book. For the book, which is supposed to be coming out next week, and I'm sort of going, So that's on me. They will be coming up, but they'll be coming out on Saturday. Hello, Gahedron. Hello, the G40. Hello, Jack Hunter. Hello, Grace Dawson. Glad to see Jeff Beeler is here. That's rather good considering he's responsible for the topic. Hello, John South. Hello, Robin McFarlane. Hello, Richard Orter. Hello, Constant Drowsiness. Do you know on an XSplit work or else you're burning down? No, it could be far worse. Although, I have to admit, there is one of my favourite ever questions being asked for tomorrow night's Admirals. But I do now think, as I have not had lunch, or only ready for breakfast, please note that I will have a proper meal at some point, but today I spent the day tender mercying a computer. So I'm resorting to supplementing my Iron Brew with, and I block out the advertising, cherry bakewells. Hang on. So if anyone wonders what I'm eating in the next probably 3 hours, possibly more, even though I've only got 12 slides. Could well be 3 hours, because it is such a rich topic. Just now, first time I've made one of these in a while, and I think Doug may have finally flipped. There's always a possibility. That's been around for a while. It's always there. The XSplit and my computer, and Microsoft Word combined, possibly could put there. But let's be honest, the only thing that would make my life more difficult was if I was trying to manage the ones with, I don't know, Apple macOS. Which I swear has been designed to drive people to drink. Hello, Wesley Johnson. First live, I think. Well, cool. Thank you for joining us. Now, I do have some around here. A mouse. There we go. I have a mouse. Let's see if I can up the lighting just a tad. That's a bit better. And for those who are wondering, yes, that's my birthday card is still up. I can have it up for the rest of the week. I will be having it up for, well, at least a few more days. You see, I know Drax's food video has come out today, and I have actually been having video chats with him quite regularly during the making of this process, and it's been fun. It has been fun. Ankash, just tried to get my Cantonese wife interested, and she just rolled my eyes and said, well, we studied this in school. Probably did. Hello, I'll be listening when I can, but about to head off to get my first vaccine. Good luck, Nautical Wolf. There is an Osprey book or two on this topic. There is a lot of Osprey books on this topic. Do you know what I know? Do you need a new computer built? I have my own gaming PC, which is up in the attic, nice and properly stored at the moment. Looked after. And I haven't brought it down because I haven't got my desk down here yet. And I haven't got my desk down here yet because, well, for two reasons. One, I've been figuring out how to get it down from my bedroom without bashing everything on the way. And two, because I am deciding if I need to do any more woodwork. And I want to have this at least finished and the wood pile out the way before I bring in my desk, my computer, and my fridge. The birthday was last week, if anyone's wondering. Don't worry, the card's still up. Because that's been my little ray of sunshine for most of this week whenever I've been dealing with weird stuff. So I've gone, Because most of the cards are in their traditional place in our lounge. That, rather like the Valentine's card, has come to me. Coming to my office. All right. So, hello RF4, hello Ultradit, and hello Bijon. So, yes, do you know what I'm a gaming computer I built myself. Ronan Cash asked what dynasty it was. Qing Dynasty for China. It was King Gojong for Korea. It's quite cool. Anyway, so for starters, Jeff Beeler is absolutely right when he puts the question, fighting a modern war with feudal societies. Because you will find a lot of historians have considered them feudal societies. However, I would like to think that the modern historian and and I would argue the modern person who's been watching news for the last 20-odd years is used to the concept of someone using tradition to wrap up and give a veneer of respectability to what is a very modern aggression. There is also, and this is something you have to be quite careful of, in the local accounts at the time, especially some of the ones going back to Europe, there is a very strong sense, especially from some of the German officers who make up quite a lot of land force advisors involved, because they've been so successful beating up the French and various other things regularly. Everyone's been going, oh, I need an army done. I must buy some German officers. But you have to remember, the German officers are, quite a lot of them, well, if they express those attitudes and maintain them today, we would call them racist pigs. That's what we would call them. In their times, they are not unusual for the German officer corps of the time. They have a very strict classist approach to the world, and they have a very much tiered over view of Orientals versus Europeans. And you have to remember also that a lot of this can affect where you go and what you see. And if you're comparing the run of the day of what you see out here in this place to what you see in the pinnacle of your capital city, you might well not see the truth. So, we're going to be careful about them. Feudal, I'm keeping it because it is useful, because it is worthwhile considering it from that angle. But I'm not sure I'd call this a feudal war, or feudal societies at this point. King announced, wish I had time to listen in right now, but I'm excited to get to it tonight. Thank you. The Germans trained a lot of armies. The RN trained a lot of navies. Oh, that's what turns up all over this one. It's brilliant. Like, there's a navy involved. Where are the Royal Navy? Everywhere. So, let's first consider this. The Sino-Japanese Wars. There are two. There's the first Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 95, and the second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945. Please note, technically, but that's a technicality which we can all consider absolute twaddle, but technically, the Japanese invasion of Taiwan of 1895 is considered separate from the first Sino-Japanese War, despite the fact it comes up quite clearly on that map of the first Sino-Japanese War. You'll also notice something if you look at this very carefully. A lot of the fighting takes place in what we would call modern Korea. There is a reason for that. The Sino-Japanese War, for want of a better phrase, is fought over control of Korea. Yeah, it's always great when you can have a war in someone else's country. We want to have a war. We don't want to spoil our own countries. Let's have a war in this other country. They're in between us. Who cares? It's kind of like Belgium. Every time Germany and France go into a rumble, they're sort of going, great. You're going to pick us, aren't you? You know, they even get the Battle of Waterloo when the British and French want to have a rumble. France has plenty of place to have a battle. There is plenty of places. Or you can go to the sea and have the traditional Anglo-French battle. No, no, no. We'll have the battle in Belgium. Yes, there are perfectly good logical reasons for why it turns up in Belgium, but there's also the fact that it's in a country which is not fighting the war, primarily. They get it drawn in because, of course, they're going to get drawn in, but, you know, it's the same with poor Korea. The Sino-Japanese War, first Sino-Japanese War, primarily takes place in Korea, and at no point is it called the Korean War. So, what else has happened? Well, other wars involving Japan and Japan. The Beijing War, where some Japanese decided to get involved in it. That's always fun. Then there's the Mongol invasions of Japan. The Zhejiang Wuku raids, where, I do love this, Chinese-led international merchant pirates, including Japanese, attack Ming Dynasty China. Nicest way. Sir Francis Drake, eat your heart out with that one. Japanese invasions of Korea between 1592 and 1598. The Joseon coalition has to fight them off. Then there's the Japanese invasion of Taiwan in 1895, as I already mentioned. The Boxer Rebellion, where the Japanese pile in as well, you know, nicest way. They're the ones who destroyed the freaking Chinese Navy, or one of the major Chinese navies, in the first Sino-Japanese War, and then they're just coming in for a good old kicking. The Yunnan incident in 1928, when Japanese decided to use warlords to take on the Kuomintang, which was the Chinese government at the time. Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. What the Japanese call their area Manchuria, Manchukuo, from 32 to 42. There's the January 28th, as we discussed before, in 1932 in Shanghai. And then there's the defense of the Great Wall. And there is also the fact that China and Japan fight the whole way through the Second World War, because let's be honest, the Second Sino-Japanese War, if you want to make a case, you can make a case for World War II starting in 1937, because principal ally, China, is taking on a principal member of the Axis, Japan, in 1937. And by the way, as we were talking about with the Lend-Lease Act, remember, who were the three nations America was supplying with arms under Lend-Lease? Britain, Greece, and China. Yeah, they've been fighting a while. Well, Poland has had, there's an interesting question coming from Juno. Which country seems to be the boxing ring of the world when it comes to wars on other countries' soil? America had fun for a good few years. So did India. Belgium probably has to take it because it had Napoleonic Wars, World War I and World War II fought there. They're probably going to take a lot of it. Vietnam has been... Oh, we don't want to go there. Poor Vietnam. Korea has had plenty of fun. Afghanistan has always been pretty. There are plenty of countries which have served as boxing rings. Basically, if you want to be a nice, peaceful, quiet country, your requirements are do not be anywhere near a position between borders of other countries. Also, there are several islands in the Pacific which, frankly, in World War II got outsized efforts. Germany had that for a while, but really Germany's been less of the world's boxing ring than Germany likes to make out. Most of the time Germany was the world's boxing ring, they were actually German armies which were hired by other people in the world. So it's not really the world's boxing ring if you're just being hired to have the fight in your home. At this point, was Korea already part of Japan? Korea was Korea. We'll be getting into that one in about a second. The point is, China and Japan have been having wars for a long time. The difference is, usually they're on much of a parity in terms of technology. Although the Japanese tend to have an advantage in terms of sneakiness. Mainly because China is so big, they can't really be sneaky. You cannot suddenly put an army together in China and make it appear on your neighbor's doorstep. It's going to have to do too much movement. You might achieve strategic surprise, but you will never achieve tactical surprise. Whereas the Japanese in their attacks can often achieve both tactical and strategic surprise. Strategic surprise is basically, we didn't think they were coming this year. Tactical surprise is, we didn't know they were coming at all. A case can be made for 1947, but World War II on political economic level began in Versailles in 1919. I know there are lots of people who made that case back there, but honestly, trust me, enough weird stuff happens in the 1920s and early 1930s that, yeah, not it's a nice thing which some historians make the case for. But I think those historians mostly forget what happens in the 1920s and early 1930s. Can we expect a Beltron section on defense review now the specifics are out? There was one on the integrated review, which came out yesterday. Yeah, probably will be one on the specifics. Especially on the Type 83. We like the sound of the Type 83. Although my good colleague Drakenfell thinks that should be his new his battle cruiser. Are they gearing up for another one? You can all hope not. Thanks, Simon Nelson. I think the area around Andreapol was a battleground par excellence, and the city itself almost never precipitated. Yeah, that was fun there. And then, of course, there is always the Dardanelles. Let's be honest, the Bosphorus and crossing Constantinople. Wolf War. I would say the Second Japanese War was just a proxy war. Then a back war theatre for the rest of World War II. So the front was, most part, static guerrilla war. Not really, but yes, I can see your point. But a static guerrilla war is not what it feels like a lot of the time. And you have to remember the Chinese army are also fighting down in Burma at the same point. They're attacking the Japanese in Burma, so you know it's nothing. So here's some background of Korea at this point. The gentleman at the top is King Gojong, not when he was 12 and ascended the throne, but what he looked like later in his life. It's a perfectly okay individual, nothing amazing, nothing particularly bad. And then there's his father, Yi Hung, or who becomes Hung Sung Da Hong Hyu Sung Da Wang because he is only 12 when he becomes king. And then there's his wife. Now, we'll get onto that in a bit, but basically, here's your problem. He is 12 when he becomes king, because Sholing Joseon, the final heir of the Joseon dynasty, the ones that are fought, if we go back, during this period of war, invasions of Korea in 1592 to 98. And let's be honest, that wasn't particularly... The Joseon family do not equip themselves particularly well in that war. They win, but at great cost, and mostly thanks to an admiral who they keep trying to execute because of domestic politics and fear he could overwhelm them, because he's actually an efficient admiral. And the trick to control in Korea, there is a reason why the Korean Navy is as powerful as it is. It's a peninsula. It has water on 3 sides and mountains down the middle. You want a rapid reaction, you want rapid logistics, you're going by sea. Anyway, so, how do I put this politely? Hyunson Dae Wong-hun is not a reformer. He's very much for traditional ways, because those traditional ways give him a lot of power as the king's father-in-law and de facto king. And he keeps trying to come with reasons for why his son should not become proper king, even when he's no longer 12. He's fun. He likes power. We've all heard of that before. King Gojong, well, Gojong is a nice enough guy. I wouldn't call him particularly bright. I wouldn't call him particularly dumb. He's fairly run-of-the-mill as monarchs go. But he seems to be slightly progressive in terms of wanting alliances and wanting things abroad. And he finds a way to work through this, because despite Hyosung Daewonong, who was particularly worried about having to deal with a father-in-law and king regents who are fathers-in-law as a potential threat, so picks a young lady who is an orphan, because then he thinks he isn't going to have to deal with a father-in-law from a very low-ranking clan, which had minimum power, Min, finds he has a problem. A, she turns out to be a very bright, very smart young lady. Secondly, she and Gojong actually get along. It's an arranged marriage, but they get along pretty darn well. And actually managed to form a fairly effective team for most of their time that she's alive. And she starts to bring her family members in, which of course he allows, because, you know, they're from a weak clan. It doesn't matter if they have a few positions in the palace. Eventually it does matter, because he gets forced out. So, what happens at this point? Well, a lot of fun. Hello, Michael Patton. Adam, in many ways, Koreans invented ironclad ships. We won't go into that one, because that's a whole different discussion about the turtle ships. And it's fun. Difference with Brittany is that family executions are not uncommon in royal families. No, they're not. It's also not uncommon for the king underage to be denied it when they get until and when they're sort of in their early 20s to suddenly have an accident and die, and then their younger brother have to take over. It's fun times. This is how weak clans become not so weak clans. True, they get positions in the royal court. Comes to us, is there a good Korean drama on this? There are several very good Korean dramas on this. I actually ended up watching one of them for a bit and going, I think there's one. There is one on Netflix, but I haven't seen that. I've been watching the ones on YouTube. Mainly because I was worried if I looked up them on Netflix, it would give me all sorts of Netflix selections from now on, and frankly, I have enough with the Netflix I have. Also, Type 83 looks good. I don't think they've decided what the Type 83 is going to be yet, by a long shot. It's going to be a few years down the road. Anyway, getting back to this. So, basically, 12-year-old has come to the throne in 1864. He marries soon after that a 15-year-old. We can all say lucky 12-year-old. But it's slightly, it's not really what we'd like to see these days. What we want, what we'd like happening, what would happen these days, and what we'd like to see. But, you know, this is the times we're talking about. But it's not that long ago when you think about it. And basically 11 years later, so he's 23, just at the point that possibly his dear old pater is thinking about bumping him off, and using Empress Myeongsong's family connection, so now in the office, they get rid of Daddy. They get rid of the Dada. He gets moved on. And in 1876 and then 1882, they make treaties with Japan and with America. They also have fairly good relations going on with China. And they are trying to balance the issues. Now, here's the thing. There are three things which come up. Traditionally, Korea is China's vassal. Now, what this really means is that, as a rule, China doesn't really care what the Koreans do as long as no one else mucks around in Korea. Anyone else mucks around in Korea, the Chinese get worried because Korea is very close to them and they don't want them getting in it. Because usually, if anyone else is mucking around in Korea, it's Japanese. It's fun times. So that's a traditional relationship. Japan, the official line that comes out is they're pro-reform in Korea because they were worried Korea could be used as a backdoor to threaten them. So they wanted Korea to have a modern military, a modern navy, all these sort of things. There is one problem with that. As I've just pointed out, Gojong and Myeongsong are reforming. They are making trade agreements. They are bringing in German advisors. They are bringing in all sorts of people to train up their local forces. Theoretically, that should mean Japan is very pro them and happy with them. Japan ends up supporting Dai Wong-un, who is not pro that. And the reforms he tends to be trying to push in aren't really what you call reforms so much as turning Korea from a sort of Chinese vassal into an absolutely Japanese vassal, because the Japanese will provide him with the forces to force Ma Yong-song out and basically kidnap his own son and threaten his own son. You know, he's a nice person. And in the time of Henry VIII, you were dead at the age of in your 40s. So, yeah. Margaret Buffon, yeah, married at 12 and had a child. Yeah, we will all agree that that's not really how we want to do it. The Koreans are proto-industrializing at this point. Ron Cash, the Chinese emperors took Korean wives and concubines to keep the relational ties strong, but never married Japanese. Wife is feeling fairly involved. That's true. And in fact, quite a lot of some most powerful queens in Chinese history and empresses have been Korean. Fun times. So basically, Dai Wang was across the moment. He you know, in the nicest way, what he should have done, probably, is told his son he needed to join a monastery. That would have been easier, but no. He decides that he's got to marry immediately to secure the throne, which means he has to marry a slightly older girl, because even this time they realize that they realize in a nicest way there is a bit too young for doing the things, and my little cousins are watching, so I'm trying to keep this as possible, but I know they will A, be making fun of me later, and B, their mums will still probably be telling me I'm going too far. So that's why he went with a 15-year-old. Unfortunately, as anyone else knows, 15-year-old turning to, well, by 1875, that's 11 years, so she's 26 by that point. Gong Rung is 23 and she is 26. So we all know there is a direct transition. You can start off demure and quiet at 15. By 26, you can be a very loud personality. Interesting enough, the marriage went wrong for the father-in-law, not for the son. Come, can you make a military news chat on the Discord? I will do it at some point. Garrison, isn't that what a lot of Discord is called? That is part of my thinking, which is why I haven't done one yet. Wrong cash. So true. Adam, it's the first time she's listened to me, the God Doctor. Adam Clinton. Living natively with the world of finally. I am glad when I have an informed audience. As any good lecturer will tell you, when you actually have people in the room who have done the reading, it makes our lives so much easier. Besides, we don't have to rely on ourselves to remember everything. Robert, what when you get the office done, kids grow up a little, I shudder to think what you'll be like writing checks. Basically, try the armchair admirals, mate. Or the bilge pumps, me, occasionally. And then you have China. Well, China has its own issues. We can say Korea is having trouble. In other words, Korea is pushing from a traditional agricultural background, which is dominated with not much agricultural land, to try and industrialize slowly and try and reform slowly. With a lot of outside influences trying to muck around in Korea. There's also Russia, which is always fun. We all love Russia. It's lovely. China has even more problems. Japan has an advantage. which is the same advantage Korea could use if someone took the taps off and allowed them to do it, which is possibly one of the problems Japan has with Empress Maisong and King Gojong, what they're doing. They are, if they have water around them, and if you're trying to industrialize a nation quickly, and you do not have a lot of road infrastructure of high quality, you do not have necessary enough canals going to the right places, and canals take a while to build, remember. It's a problem. Japan can move the stuff around very quickly. They're all living on the coast. All their centers of industry are on the coast to begin with anyway, so they can just move the stuff from port to port. They can bring into ports, and it's not far to get it to where you need when you need to import the stuff. It's great. Korea is starting this. China has a many times larger job to do to industrialize and modernize their nation, and many times more complicated scenario because they have to industrialize it whilst also maintaining borders and traditional structures as much as they can, because they have enemies at every single gate. And let's put it this way, poor China has issues. And most importantly, China has problems in terms of how it approaches matters. There is a reason for this. You could call it socio-cultural. China has traditionally been the very big dog in its area. It's been massive. Look at the voyages of Admiral Zheng He, all that stuff. It is a massively powerful nation. It's used to being the middle kingdom between heaven and earth in its worldview. And this means that when it comes to asking for help, when it comes to going, maybe we don't know everything we need to know, it's sometimes harder for them to ask. Whereas Korea, which wasn't, because they were technically a Chinese vassal, well, it's less embarrassing for them to ask someone else for help, because they've always traditionally had that ability. And Japan, well, they got humbled. They got beaten up by the Americans. Figuratively. And so they're overcompensating because of that. Hello, Nook. Grabbing late on trench. Hello, Trent Tlenko. Even on Japanese railways carried more passengers than freight due to coastal shipping. Even coal mines used railways to get coast to the sea, coal to the sea, and onto coastal ships. Yeah. Many issues they had. Many. Did Russia have a board of Korea at this point? We will be getting on to this. Now, hello, Eric Gaffman. China is like America today. Know it all, know nothings. Sadly. Ron Cash, China was just as racist as the German officers. There are lots of countries which are just as racist as the German officers at this point. You have to remember, racism does not go all one way in any stretch of the imagination. Especially not this time. And there is. It's not nice. You know, the first rule in academia you're always taught, and when you do book reviews especially, is never judge a book by its cover. We do, but we don't. You shouldn't. No, you shouldn't. If it's a good cover, that will raise your idea of what the content is, but you'll still read the content totally with an open mind. It's human beings. We're visual creatures. So this cartoon is actually drawn up after the first Sino-Japanese War. But honestly, the Europeans are already here and in the thick of everything. They are. They always will be. They are after money. They are after influence. And to an extent, they're after power and prestige versus themselves. You'll notice in that picture, Japan is pictured next to the Europeans. Japan is one of those nations carving up China. France supporting Russia. Germany, so eager for its empire, has both hands on its dagger plunging in. I have to say I always watch the British more as well, because the British, if you look at it, are the only ones with their hands flat on the table. And it's a case of, yes, you plunge your dagger in, but this is all our land. And I have a knife just sitting off in this hand. The second hand is an interesting one to watch. The Japanese are considering their moves. You know, it's always interesting to consider from the cartoon perspective what the cartoonist is getting right and wrong. It's also worth considering what are the politics going on here. Because if China and Japan are at war with each other, who benefits from that? The people selling them weapons? Yep. People who want to test their weapons out in a theatre far away from Europe? Yeah. More importantly, if China and Japan are focused on each other, they aren't watching what anyone else is doing. Jessica Liu, the 1994 Russian-Japanese War went formally over forest concessions in Korea. Yeah. And plans for building a railway spur. No, had China already lost the opening wars yet? Yes, they lost the opening wars. Right, gosh, that picture was in my wife's secondary school history exam, apparently. Cool. That's a cool picture to be in there. There is a lot told there. It's like, if I want to work out what's going on in the financial industry these days, I tend to read the Alex cartoon in the Telegraph. A, named for given a great name. B, tends to tell me more than what's going on, what's actually written in the papers. Alright, so would you say there are parallels between China then and the Middle East post-World War I? I'd say China and the Middle East post-World War I are both in a similar state. I would say that both are equally in trouble. Someone has brilliantly described Japan in this period as, ironically, the original weaves. The Anglicization is quite fascinating. Japan. Look. In the nicest way, one of the things I often point out is if China had had the chance and had managed to get its industry in place first, and at this point, China, at the beginning, has the more powerful navy, the Beijing Navy. It has 2 German-made ironclad battleships, which are supposedly top-notch. I always love the way that it's always blamed on, yes, the maintenance of those ships wasn't that great. We'll get into this in a bit, but the maintenance is okay. Let's put it this way, if the Chinese had had British ships rather than German-made ships, the level of maintenance they had put in probably made them far more serviceable. The German maintenance was very, very precise. And that's great if you're next door to German industry. It's one of the interesting things. It's a model lesson for modern procurement techniques. And it's something which I think our Australian friends are starting to learn. Again, it's one thing buying the technology, it's a whole nother thing maintaining it. And to maintain it domestically requires a lot of industry. None of these ships would have been easy to maintain, but some are designed with tolerances for global operations in mind, and the issues that might crop up if you're operating on the other side of the world from an industrial base. And some are designed to be maintained perfectly. Growing cash, Japan is smaller than everyone else, though, importantly, though. Yes, but Japan was smaller than everyone else. But notice, France isn't just that big, but they are standing up. Japanese character is pondering, but has the biggest blade. We're not sure how much of the German one is buried in the board, but more than likely you're right, yes. China could have won if it kept its naval training up, installed quick-firing guns, and had a few more ships, modern cruisers. That's all options, which they possibly could have done if they'd had easier-to-maintain ships, so they could have done more training of them. Also a small thing, industrial, unload practice rounds from your ships before going into battle. Why? The Royal Navy was using practice rounds in World War II to fire at aircraft. It's great having practice rounds on your ships. Precision engineering makes some maintenance nightmares. It's the T-34 versus King Tiger argument. Pretty much. They are problematic scenarios for everyone. And it's sad, really. So, Russia. Okay. This is Russia at its greatest extent. Please notice the large chunk of China, Manchuria area, which is, how do I put this politely, at least informally considered under the control of Russia. Also notice, top third of Iran. Yeah. And Finland. And Alaska. The Russian Empire is massive at this precise time. And honestly, the Japanese are more worried about the Russian Empire than they are worried about the Yankees. Even though the Yankees like to turn up and cause trouble, the Great White Fleet comes around in a few years' time, they're fine. Frankly, the Brits are lovely because we're an island the other side of the world, and really, as long as Japan isn't looking at going past Singapore, we ain't gonna worry about them too much at this point. But Japan is worried about Russia. Why? Because if you look up there, you can see Russia's already started working down towards them via various island hopping. Russia can be a major problem very easily. And Russia wants to be a major problem. Russia wants to be a major power. They are a major power in terms of geography and mass, but they are the pondering Russian bear. They are slow to mobilize. When they do, they overwhelm, and they're big, big, whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. Sort of, we're throwing hundreds upon thousands of troops at you approach. That ain't good. And the thing is, there is Korea, this semi-independent state, this developing state, which is key to Japanese food supplies. It becomes a worry. Vision. On tech, Japan came to adopt American railway practices over the British because American trains and railways were good enough. British locomotives required more heavy and specialized maintenance. Yeah, because the British railways had that advantage in some respects, but also there is another reason for that as well. You have to remember Britain is supplying trains to India, trains to Africa, trains all over the world at this point. Buying American trains for Japanese lines made sense because Japanese lines have a lot more inclines and all sorts of things. British inclines are fairly flat and manageable. America has all sorts of weird things thanks to their the railways they put through their own mountainous regions. So there is a reason why the two train sort of builders that Japan likes to look at are Swiss and American. And let's be honest, the American have a lot more ability to start exporting them. Run cash. China had massive issues importing material they would buy a bit and try and home produce without the required levels of industry. That they would try. I thought Drac was buying his cruiser from South Korea. Possibly. I don't think the Type 83 might be an option. British build expensive railways, double tracking from the start. Not always. There's a few single track passing lines around the world that are British built. By top third of Iran, I think you mean Greater Azerbaijan. If you look down there, you'll see Iran's divided, or rather Persia is divided into spheres of influence at this point, at their greatest extent. And that's true. At the greatest extent, Persia is divided into spheres of influence between the British and the Russians, which is one of the reasons why Iran is never technically turned into a conquered state. ever technically invaded until World War II, when it sounds like they're going to go pro-Nazi Germany, and so they get invaded both by Britain and the Soviet Union. What the bleep accent is that? What is the accent? You do not understand my wonderful accent. Oh, I cannot understand why you do not understand my wonderful accent. Jessica Tulu. Dr. Clark, reaction on Russia, priceless. Brother, isn't it funny how we call it the Sino-Japanese War and so many other countries, not China, Japan, are involved? Well, welcome to any war. Let's be honest, there's the Franco-Prussian War, where the French are basically bricking themselves the whole time, worried that the British and the Royal Navy might get involved. So they have to keep a whole load of troops back because they're worried that there might be an amphibious assault from Britain. Jebia. China needed more steaming information training and more captains who did not regard their ships as personal thieves, not to be risked in battle. China needed a fair amount of work on the Navy. British locomotives place cylinders inside the frames, Americans outside the frame, making maintenance easier. American locos broke more often, but easier to fix, and quite suddenly improved. Vision, don't take this wrong way, but have a look at the British trains supplied to India and Africa. I think you might well find some of those, and some of the ones we supplied to Argentina had the cylinders outside the frames. And Feeler, Russia was already started building the Trans-Siberian Railway at this time, and it was regarded as the official Russian army of the 1800s. Yes. Trouble is, I would say the difference between the Russian army and the Russian navy at this point, and this builds up into the Battle of Tsushima and the whole Russo-Japanese War, is the Russian navy has these very, very good admirals who are given this weird collection of ships to actually try and do something with, and they try and achieve a lot with it. The Russian army has these very, very good troops with, again, a weird collection of equipment, and not as good at generals as they have admirals for some reason. Very sweet. British also went to the Swiss and mountain railways in India. Yeah. JB, I find it amazing how quickly Japan became dependent on Korea and agriculture after it opened up trade. Well, this is because I have an argument on this one. I would argue when Korea opens up, it becomes official trade. But unofficially, that stuff must have been going somewhere prior to that. And it can't have all been going to China. There just aren't the roads or the ships. Vision. British engineers built first railways in Honshu. US engineers built first railways in Hokkaido. By 1900, Japan started building its own locos. Railways utilized a mix of UK and British practices. Yeah. Being able to build locomotives and roll steel rails was in 1900 symbols of being an advanced industrial power. Domestic building of warships followed soon after in Japan. All true. Tom Garning. Apparently, Dr. Clark is now an undead Voloshian prince. That can be fun. Jay Beeler. Only Japan and China with Korea to one side actually fought. The other countries came in after the peace treaty. Oh, well, they were there in spirit and in advisors. And in British case, a ship which got sunk. Here's the thing. Here's the classic thing. How did the Japanese were getting this to evacuate? They get extracted by a British sloop which just happens to be there when their ship sinks. How are the Chinese getting their troops to Japan, to Korea? Oh, it's on a British merchant ship. Yeah. It's just merchant support. There's a lot of things going on in the British angle. There is a lot of stuff. Darren, remember, Gojong was his temple name and given only given posthumously. I know, but in I have enough trouble pronouncing his real name. Gojong is viable, and you can find it on the internet. So I am keeping to that, Tianwang. There is limited life in my ability to pronounce some of these names. And also, American railways had less industrial. Breakdowns likely far from technical sport. Had to be easier at least to patch repair. Yes, to an extent. In Central America, it's a long way from anywhere. That's why you find so many American trains. If you go through the center of America, you can find trains sitting off on random sidings. I know because I have a friend whose literal job, they are retired and sponsored by one of the heritage railways in America to pretty much ride the rails, hunting for sidings where there are trains stored in them. And the reason they go along the railways is because some of these sidings are no longer on maps because the railways don't use them anymore. They've been disconnected. And sometimes the aerial photos don't tell you enough because you don't see it from above because of the trees. And no one's going to give them access to radar satellites to do the hunting. But they actually get sponsored, basically get, well, it's not retired. They're in their 60s, but they basically, they have a wonderful time. Have ability to walk, hire a car, and wander around, will travel. So them and their wife spend their life on the railways. I think actually just the last year has been the longest time they spent at the home in like 10 years. How much of this war was a naval affair? A lot. What are those cookies you're eating? I'm not eating cookies. I'm eating cherry Bakewell tartlets. So you might improve trucks on railcars. There's been a lot of discussion on railways on this, but actually that's the interesting thing. That's the one thing there isn't much of in this war. If we go back, the one thing there isn't much, and as you can see from this, if we expand it to its full maximum, Japan and Japanese movements, a lot of them are by sea. Chinese movements, a lot of them are by sea. There is a reason for this. There isn't much else to move them on. See, might improve trucks on rail cars and have experience of building across the continent. Make transcontinental Canadian, American, Australian. Use US crews and experienced tech. For some of their stuff, yes, they did. China's has many European officers in its armies and navies. There's several different kinds of army and navy this time. Japan just has the army and the guard and navy. That helps. Yes, it has about 4 different navies and multiple armies at this point. And one of the things you have to remember is that one of the advantages Japan has in this war, which is often forgotten, to go, oh, Japan exercises such technical brilliance and they have so much firepower. The largest Chinese armies aren't fighting the annoying Japanese. The largest Chinese armies, and arguably some of the best trained Chinese armies, are actually having to deal with the Dung Kong Rebellion. I think I got that right, rebellion. There are 2 rebellions that both start with D. Du Yong and Dung Kong. And it's just fun. Vision. Best road taken 1900 was a mix of US and British. I don't know, Ted Clark. Must be great to be paid for training upon it. Oh, it is. Gets hotels, all those things, and basically they get a small allowance towards their living expenses, and they get all their travel expenses paid and all their hotel expenses paid. They don't really say it's not sort of a job; it's their stuff is paid from. But they both got pensions. They have no grandkids at the moment, so they are traveling. When they get grandkids, then they might sort of stay in one place a bit longer. Cow catchers and headlights adopted for colonial British railways, examples of US practices. Oh, yes. Paragraph. China at a point is still a set of petty kingdoms, clans really, theoretical allegiance, but without the usual tenure rights or duties of feudalism. It's an interesting collection. Francash, Beckel Titles, you Francophile, Dr. Clark. They have cherries on. Clearly, Onshon is a good place to see movements. It is a great place to see movements. Desgod. Hello, Desgod. Heard the AstraZeneca vaccine Monday, and this evening was the first point since then I felt up to going shopping. Yeah, AstraZeneca vaccine, in my own experience, it made me achy for about a week, which isn't unusual. Honestly, I've had a few vaccines before from pretty much the same thing. I'm fine though. Next one is at the end of next month, beginning of May. I'm loving this knowledge depth. There is a lot of knowledge depth going on in the live stream. That's why I cut down. I have to admit, there are parts 2 and 3 I've cut out of the live. They will be done in a long patrol because, honestly, I didn't think we'd ever move, and it's 7:45. So we've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes. And yeah. Haven't finished part 1 yet. Story of my parents, and no, they ain't getting grandkids anytime soon. Well, I actually think it's a great idea, because actually the son was the one who found his dad and mum the job, so it stops them being in. He and his wife got married, and basically went. Then found, oh yeah, this person's coming to our wedding. Oh yeah, we're just looking. The person who used to do this job for us has just had to stop doing it because they've now got grandkids. Oh, we haven't got grandkids. Here are the things. Start off 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years later. Yay! I think it's about 6 years later actually now. That's what. What's the you say? The Japanese forces spending as much time and more effort fighting other Chinese forces whilst with an outside enemy. Never heard that before. Oh yeah, it's colossal the amounts of going now. This is HMS Flying Fish, by the way. As said, there is the 1882 Imo crisis. Now, here's a good example of the sort of fun which can have. So, in 1882, the Korean Peninsula experiences a severe drought, which leads to food shortages. Korea is also on the verge of bankruptcy because, as I said, they're a heavily agricultural-dependent economy. They're still trying to evolve. And they even fall behind on military pay. Not something you want to do. There is also a small issue in that there are, and please note, I am translating this. There is the regular army and there is a special army, the Belegun or the Poilungin, which had been set up in 1876. Well, sort of 1876, officially in 1881, trained by Japanese officers. It received better treatment than the regular Korean army and better pay. And basically, it had been set up by the Korean government in 1881, inviting Japanese military attaché, Lieutenant Harinui Rizzo, to create a modern army. And he took about 100 young men of the aristocracy to the Japanese military training, and they were trained up. And the trouble is that the Korean army was not big. So you have 100 getting special treatment at the same time as you're discharging 1,000 as part of your overhauling, as they're either old or disabled. Which sounds terrible to people then, because apparently, even if you were old or disabled, you should still be able to serve in the army. And you sort of go, I can understand because they don't have a pension plan. But, you know, I can also understand the leaders going, no, we don't want to pay for you. Anyway, in June 1882, King Gojong, being informed of the situation about his soldiers' pay and food, ordered that a month's allowance of rice be given to the soldiers. He directed Min Jeon-ho, who was the overseer of the government finances, and Queen Min's nephew, that's his wife, Empress Maya Song, to handle the matter. Min handed the matter over to his steward, who then decided to sell the good rice he'd been given, rather than giving it to the troops, because they're just troops, it doesn't matter, and used the money to buy millet, which he mixed with sand and bran. As a result, the troops weren't getting rice. In fact, it was rotten, inedible crud. And this caused a mutiny. The enraged soldiers decided to head for Min Gin-ho's residence, as they believed that he had swindled them out of their rice, rather than him being a bit of an idiot and trusting his steward. Min then decided to order the police to arrest some of the ringleaders, announced they would be executed next morning, because, you know, this will deal with the agitators, because it's always a good idea. Please don't take this the wrong way, but first rule, when you're dealing with soldiers who are mutinying, unless you've got a lot of police, don't. Meet them with food. Stand outside with the doors open, give them food and go, I'm sorry, my steward there mucked up. I will deal with him tomorrow. He's being taken off by the police, but please find food here. Please find alcohol. Then you will find yourself buying an army. So if there's ever is a revolution, you'll be at the head of it. If you try and arrest them, you will then find yourself in a lot of trouble. He ordered the police to arrest the ringleaders and announced they would be executed next morning. He thought this would serve as a deterrent. And instead, actually, the rioters broke into Min's house to take vengeance, and so took their frustrations out on his furniture and other possessions as he wasn't there, and then moved on to an armory where they took weapons from and ammunition before overpowering the guards in the prison and releasing the men who'd been arrested that day, but also many political prisoners as well. Min then summons the rest of the Special Army and other army units who have not mutinied to quell the rebellion, but that's too late. The original body mutineers get more soldiers joining them, as well as a lot of disaffected citizenry of the city, who come surprisingly well armed. The rioters then turned their attention on the Japanese, who they blamed. One group headed to Lieutenant Horemito's quarters and killed him. That's the gentleman who, as I said, is in charge of the Special Army, or the Polygon. Another group, some 3,000 strong, headed for the Japanese legation, where Hanabosu Yoshida, the Minister of Korea, and 27 members of the legation resided. They decided that they didn't want to be anywhere near there. So Hanabosu gives orders to burn the legation, the important documents to send in fire, and then the members of the legation escape through a rear gate. They fled to the harbour and boarded a boat which took them down the Han River to Chimpulwo. They tried to take refuge with the Incheon commandant, but he had a change of, how do I put his heart? So they decided to escape to the harbour during heavy rain, pursued by Korean soldiers. 6 Japanese were killed, another 5 were seriously wounded, and the survivors carrying the wounded, they boarded a small boat and headed out for open sea, where 3 days later they were rescued by the British survey ship, or sloop, HMS Flying Fish, which took them to Nagasaki. The day after that, the rioters attacked the Japanese legation. They forced their way into Royal Palace, where they found and killed Min Jae-ho, finally, as a dozen other high-ranking officers. They searched for Queen Min. They couldn't find her. She managed to escape. And amazingly, this is just amazing. It's just completely untrue. All this happens, and suddenly Dai Won-gun goes, I'm now back in charge, because obviously my son isn't capable of doing it. I am now the king's father-in-law again, and I'm running the country. All soldiers. And surprisingly, though, surprisingly well-armed and very motivated and very well-organised civilians who had joined the riot, just aggravated citizens, started behaving. It's amazing. Dongkak person reverted. That's Dongkak. There's also another one as well. There's Dungan. Dingwon. Many generals in Chinese history have also been Korean. Yeah. Kaplan. Story of my parents. No, they ain't getting Americans. Funny photos are of Japanese rail yards in 1900s. Let's not forget China was also reeling from the Taiping Rebellion. There are lots of things for China's reeling from this point. But, do you normally cherry pick your food from Derbyshire? Some days. I'm prepared to bet HMS Flying Fish had an NSFW nickname. There are all sorts of nicknames for HMS Flying Fish. Japan also modernized their financial system. China really was horrendous. Japan's finances really were impressive. With a decade or so, Western banks no longer had a market in Japan. Actually, within a decade or so, Western banks tended to work through local subsidiaries they were partners with, which is far more sensible. Does good. Send your officers to train someone's army when you've done invade, because you know how pretty much exactly how they'll respond to your actions. Yeah. Count, what's the lives for 2 weeks' time in its long patrols, please? Let's see. 2 weeks' time. Lives, we have April and we have 2nd of April, we have the Tiger and Minotaur class, and 9th of April we have the Battle of Saints. And then we have all the long patrols up. I know, it's come up. It's always fun when it comes up. But I have it in here to remind me to say thank you to everyone who's on Discord. Thank you to everyone who likes. Thank you to everyone who subscribes. Thank you to everyone who watches the videos. And thank you to everyone who's joined Patreon to fund my book habit. Thank you to everyone who does the super chats. They fund my book habit and my takeaway habit occasionally. Might be a takeaway habit today. I have currently got a pizza sitting in the freezer to cook, but I'm not sure if I will do after this. Razor, you should always keep the military well fed and happy. I don't know. UK service ship just offshore of a tense situation. Gosh, such a coincidence. There's so many coincidences in this one. It's the Imo incident. They're just coincidences on coincidences on coincidences. And I can guarantee if you look, you will never find any paperwork. But I'm just saying that both the British ambassador in Beijing and the British ambassador in Seoul have radios at this time, as far from my understanding. Well, sort of. And when I put radio, how do I mean that? Not radios as we would consider a radio. They have, let's put it this way, the ability to try and communicate. They have the telegraph, and they can flash out messages. We do have some telegraph cables. There's got one of those odd coup d'etat where that happens entirely by coincidence. Oh, it's amazing. And the fact that they're all heading to try and kill off the daughter-in-law. So anyway, did you get to eat any of Drax's hardtack and salt beef? So far, the only one I'm willing to try would be the salt beef. I have watched him trying to eat the others. The Manchus had 2 different military organizations, the Effet Manchu Army and the Provincial Army, split into ineffective official ones and under military command, effective unofficial armies, and a civilian command. There are lots of armies under civilian commands. Wireless telegraphy. There's all sorts of funds going on. Anyway, so now part 4. And this is going to be the interesting thing, because I'm going to get into some of the organizations before we start. The Japanese combatants for the First Sino-Japanese War are grouped around a cruiser navy. In many ways, they are formed and based on the idea of the Royal Navy, but combined with a sort of Juna Cole doctrine. But they've been working up to that. They have protected cruisers, the Matsushima, the Itsushima, the Hashidate, the Naniwa, Takande, Yama, Akitsumiya, Yoshino, Izumi, Chiyoda, Taeko, and Suzuki. They have armored corvettes, Hei, Kongo, Yamato, Katsugari, Musashi, Kaiman, Tenryu, and Magi, an ironclad warship, Fuso, and a few gunboats, Maya, Tokai, Tako, Akagi, Banyo, and Oshima. Now, if those names do sound familiar to you in terms of Japanese naming, yes, those names do after this war get very, very much lauded, and they advance up the status of units quite quickly. The Japanese army was primarily French up until about 1886. And it had been turned into a French-style Western conscription-enforced army in 1873. In 1886, the Japanese turned from the French model to the German-Prussian model as the basis of their army, and they start adopting all sorts of artillery, engineering regiments, and organizations and independent commands to structure themselves around. The Navy is structured around the Royal Navy and based around a cruising navy, and that kind of commerce, economic warfare. It's an interesting thing. Annals 1630-365. Greetings, sir. The Manchus had 4 separate fleets placed on them. Weihai, which fought Japan, Shanghai, obsolete and neutral, Foochow, guarded by the French, and Canton, which sent its 3 ships. Not just those either. The lives for the next 2 weeks will be repeated at the end. Don't worry, they'll be there. So, China, well, okay, so the Chinese army is a freaking mess. Theoretically, it's made up of 3 principal components. 8 banners, which were supposedly an elite force, segregated along ethnic lines, including separate Manchu, Han, Chinese, Mongol, Hu, and other ethnic formations. Bannermen, who made up the 8 banners, got a higher pay in the rest of the army and received fur privileges. Theoretically, there are 250,000 soldiers in the 8 banners. 60% of these are kept in garrisons in Beijing. The remaining 40% serve as garrison troops in other major Chinese cities. Okay? Don't get me started on this formation. It is weird as anything. So you've theoretically got 150,000 soldiers sitting in Beijing that really don't get used so much. And then you've got another 100,000 sitting around the country. The Green Standard Army, which is more like a gendarme than an army, theoretically 600,000 strong, but as I said, more like a gendarme, recruited from the majority Han Chinese population. Its soldiers weren't given any peacetime military training, but they're expected to fight in combat in any war. And then there is the 3rd component, which are called the Braves. Kind of a regular reserve force for the regular army. Usually recruited from the more distant or remote provinces of China. They're formed into very loosely organized units. They are some kind of interesting. They're some described as mercenaries, but they're usually volunteers, and they receive as much military training as their commanders see fit. They have no fixed unit organization. They have no fixed structuring. And it's impossible to know how many battle-ready Braves there actually were in 1894. There's also the Hu Army, which was under the personal authority of a politician, general and diplomat Li Hongzhang, and was created to suppress the Taiping Rebellion, which took place 1850 to 1864. They had received limited Western training by military advisors and numbered nearly 45,000 troops. It was considered the best armed military unit in China. And although China had arsenals, etc., to produce firearms, and a large number being imported from abroad, only 40% of Chinese troops at the outbreak of the war were not even armed with muskets, let alone rifles. They were armed with swords, spears, pikes, halberds, and bows and arrows. Basically, the Chinese army is a mess in this period. And then you have the Beiyang Fleet. Now, the Beiyang Fleet is the principal navy which we were fighting. Theoretically, China of the late Qing Dynasty had 4 modernized fleets, okay? Theoretically, it has 4 modernized fleets. The reality is the Beiyang Fleet is going to be the more important formation, because it is the one with ironclad battleships, Dian and Zehong, armored cruisers, Qingyun and Leon, protected cruisers, Cheyenne and Xingyun, some cruisers, they even have torpedo cruisers, Tixiang and Gangping, Zhayang and Yangwei, a coastal warship, Piyang, a corvette, Quanchi, and approximately 13 torpedo boats, plus the gunboats and charter merchant ships. They are quite a large force, but how do I put this politely? Add source. Files, images. Sci-Fi 3, it should be in that one. And yeah, it'll be that one. This is one of the Chinese battleships. This is, in fact, the Zhenhuan. It will be seized as a war prize on the 17th of February 1895. It's captured at Weihai Wei. She's one of the 2 members of the Dingyang class. Dingyang is the flagship and the father's sister. And they are main battery ironclads with 2 pairs of 12-inch guns. And it's just... Okay, they're a very complicated design. They're a very difficult design to maintain. And... how do I explain this? Can I find a decent design? Yes, I found a design. Yes, I can explain. That'll do. Add source image. Add that one. So this is what she looks like when she's been reconstructed by the Japanese. When she's been reconstructed by the Japanese, she still looks like this. It's not what I would call a functional or sensible design for actual war. It's part of the experimental ironclad period, and it's just not good. Greetings, Animal 635, 16365. Jeff Beeler, the Bannermen were the Fed troops and the provincial armies includes. The Bannermen are of varying quality. And the navies are... How do I put this? Not more rust than paint. This is one of the interesting things. At this point, the Chinese Navy, in 1894, if anyone had to ask which navy was the premier navy in Asia, they would have said China, not Japan. They have battleships. They have these ships. They look good on paper. They're just terrible. They are complicated and difficult to maintain. They are lovely in theory, but no, and no. I've read that the guns destroy the bridge when fired forward. True. The guns would rip anything up when fired forward or fired aft. They had trouble defending their stacks from them. How the heck the Chinese built a ship that looked less advanced than twin turret US monitors? Here's the thing: the Chinese didn't build this. The Germans built it for them. It's built by Germany. It is built by AG Vulcan in Stettin. And here's the thing: Japan acquires it in 1895 as a war prize. It's technically decommissioned in 1911. It does take part in the Battle of Yalu River and the Battle of Weihai Wei. You know, it's... What's interesting about this ship is that it is on approaching Weihai Wei on the 14th of November 1895, I think. No, 1894. It strikes a reef. As it attempted to move around obstacles that were erected off the harbour entrance to prevent a Japanese attack. They weren't exactly maneuverable ships. The grounding tears a hole about 6 meters or 20 feet long, causing significant flooding, surprising enough, including the port engine room. The vessel remained stuck on the reef for 3 weeks, listing the port of her main deck awash. It eventually gets salvaged and towed off the reef and into the anchorage at Weihai Wei, where she was run aground to avoid sinking. Divers were sent from Shanghai to patch the hull with concrete. Her captain, who was a decent commanding officer, took responsibility for the accident and then commits suicide the following day with a dose of opium. Now, this is one of the problems, because you have here a decent officer, there's been an accident, and commit suicide. They have an American aide, and I'll sort of roll this one to advise him. And they had done quite well in the battles. They really had. I'm trying to look up the first name of the guy who was basically ordered to commit suicide. Mm-hmm. Lin Tanzing. And a decent captain, decent commander by all sorts, had managed to keep his ship in good order. The right sorts of him are fairly decent. He works hard. And I said, commit suicide and then Captain Yang Yunglin takes his place as the ship's commander. Wei Ai didn't have any dry dock facilities to properly repair Xi'an. The concrete patch left her only partially seaworthy, so she's left moored in port. And between the grounding, the loss of their captain, the loss of lots of support, and the morale amongst the crews of the fleet because it sinks massively. The Japanese army advance on Wei Ai by the end of January 1895 and begin the Battle of Wei Hai Wei, where they quickly capture various things. Xi'an and his guns try to help them support it, and she actually managed to get a hit on the Itsukima, the Japanese cruiser, but the shell fails to detonate in time. And eventually, I think Admiral Ding orders her to scuttle the ship. Orders the ship scuttled, and provoked many senior officers of the fleet, the Beijing fleet, to commit suicide, including her new captain, Captain Yang, the next day. So basically, they all commit suicide. It's all helpful. There's a lot of problems in this war. There is a lot of problems in this war, and there is a lot of problems in this one. And there is a lot of problems with the sort of scenario going on. But these are the ships which they have in the Beiyang fleet. Jeff Beeler. The Chinese design is similar in concept to the Brazilian battleship USS Maine and Texas and HMS Flexible. This is there. Yeah, it's similar, but it's just as terrible as all of them. Mike, just got in. What the Christ is wrong with that ship? That was the Japanese battleship. The Chinese battleship. Becomes a Japanese battleship. That's good. No, that was the idea, was that, you know, this way you could fire all 4 guns forward and they could both fire across the ship. You know, there was ideas for why it was great, honestly. And it would keep the center of metrocentric height as low as it could be. There are lots of ideas which said it was a really good idea. And you'll notice the armor concentration, which saves a lot of money. It's basically one of those great ideas on a piece of paper. Great on a piece of paper. That's good. Did the designers understand which bits were going to be the sides and which were going to be the bow and stern? I have, yeah. This is the ideal time. The Chinese Navy is in good morale until the grounding, as they lost their common advantage. Yes, they are in good morale until the grounding, and then their officers keep committing suicide, which is, you know, a lovely, honourable thing to do, but not really great for crew morale. Here's the thing. You have a good, competent officer. You spent years training. They have a bad day at the office, and your response is, you know what, I've spent years paying you. We gave you the job of maneuvering a battleship through freaking difficult conditions. No one thought to send out a tug or anything to help you. And so you take responsibility and commit suicide. Then we put another officer in charge who's tries to do its job to fill it, and then they commit suicide because the fleet's going to you want the ship to Scotland, and that ruins everyone's morale. Seriously, it's almost as bad as the French Navy in the Napoleonic Wars. They keep killing off their officer class. Just get them trained, and then they're killing them. Because of the smoke and the fact they still had most of their ships and had landed their troops, the Chinese felt they won the Battle of Yellow River. The concept that they lost came after the war. Yeah. Well, that's the whole point for the Chinese, is to land troops. That's the thing. It's an objective-based system. Basically, it's an idea. Right, so I've given you an idea of some of the things in terms of what the Navy is. And I've tried to explain as best I can about the Chinese army, because the Chinese army is a mess on this period. You can understand them, and this is going to sound strange. The Chinese army had been structured in one period, and it made sense. With the destructive power armies were now able to field with modern artillery, etc., you can understand them because of the way the bannermen were organized, the 8 banners were organized, them worrying about necessarily arming ethnic groups quite so heavily. And worrying about that might cause a split up of China. But in which case, then surely you should take your 600,000 troops of your gendarmerie Green Army and go, right, I'm going to take, I don't know, 90,000 from you. Add them to the 45,000 troops trained to put down the Taiping Rebellion, and turn into roughly 135 to 150,000 good quality troops in 50,000 corps. Each structured around 4 divisions of roughly 12,500 troops. And structured each around 3 brigades of roughly, let's say, 3,000 troops. Plus the support you need for a division. You could have done that and set up a fairly decent force. Not that complicated for China at the time, but they don't because of politics. Because it would be complicated and because it would cause upset. It would have been sensible, and they could have really done with those troops, because at this point, then they could have used them. And I think, was the Chinese army designed to be a mess as the main threat to those in power in China? Would probably come from Chinese troops. Pretty much, that's what it seems to me. Right then. And this is where one of the interesting points comes in about the Chinese army, in that the Dungan revolt in northwestern China takes place at the same time. And generals Dong Fuzing, Ma Anlingang, and Mai Haiyan take their troops up to fight it. They had initially been called to fight the Japanese, and they had some of the best trained troops available at the time, and they end up having to fight up there rather than fighting the Japanese. And when I say those troops, they're taking around about 30,000 troops with them. Yeah, the Taiping Rebellion was a catalyst for private Western trained, like Chinese Gordons over Victoria's army. This was so entrenched feudal rights were not upset. Everyone saves face. Yeah, to an extent. So, this is how things start. Dongkak Rebel Army, which has been formed in the south of Korea, has no connection with a certain father-in-law. Or a father/father-in-law of the current leadership. No connection at all. King Gojong, whose army, as we've already been over, is tiny, requests help from the Qing government in China. Qing government goes, frick, you're our vassals, we'll help you, because we have a strong suspicion over who is behind this. Now, here is when history gets interesting. Under the Convention of TSN, the Chinese are supposed to notify Japan, and Japan's supposed to notify China before they intervene in Korea, even on the request of the government. Chinese claim they do. And the Chinese, in 5 days, apparently managed to organize 2,465 soldiers. Chart ships and send them. Now, here's the thing. They then take a couple of days to arrive. According to the Japanese, they don't tell them. So the Japanese respond by, on the 8th of June, beginning the landing, and they get mostly landed there by the 10th, 4,000 soldiers and 500 Marines at Yampulo, or Incheon. Now, there are a very interesting thing here. China, which has a far larger army and far more garrisons close by, manages with 5 days' notice to send to less than 2,500 troops. But we honestly expect to believe that Japan, which has to move them from a lot further away, is able to move 4,500 in 2 days. Here's the thing. You're left with two options. Either the Japanese were ready because they were supporting the rebel army and therefore had an idea that this was going to, that they were, the Korean government was going to ask for help from the Qings, because that's who you'd expect them to ask for help from. Or the other option is they received a note from the Chinese on and about the 3rd of June, which would sort of fit, because I don't expect the Chinese to rush over and tell them, but, you know, a couple of days. Gives them plenty of notice, but doesn't make them feel too great. And then charged in with more. Here's the thing. 3 days after the Japanese arrive, or begin arriving, the Chinese troops and the loyal Korean troops put down the rebellion. Dongkak Rebellion is over by the 11th of June, 1894. So, 10 days. So, on the 13th of June, the Japanese government telegraphs the commander of the Japanese forces in Korea, Otori Kokusei, to remain in Korea for as long as possible despite the end of the rebellion. 2 days after the rebellion's over. Anyone starting to think this is a little bit suspicious? 16th June, 1894. Japanese Foreign Minister Mutsu Munemitsu meets with Wang Fengzhou, the Qing ambassador to Japan, to discuss the future status of Korea. Wang states that the Qing government intends to pull out of Korea after rebellion has been suppressed and expects Japan to do the same. However, Japan retains a resident to look after Chinese primacy in Korea. Now, a resident is more an ambassador than anything else. And at this point, it's cut off a bit of the slide. I'm not sure why. Now, here's the fun. So, the Chinese have started withdrawing. 22nd of June, 1894, additional Japanese troops arrive in Korea. Yes! The rebellion has now been over 11 days. This is 2 weeks since the first Japanese troops arrived, and another couple of thousand of Japanese troops are apparently starting to arrive. Japanese Prime Minister Ito Hirohime tells Matsukameshi that since the Qing Empire appears to be making military preparations, there is probably no policy but to go to war. Mutsu tells Otori to press the Korean government on the Japanese demands. Again, don't take this the wrong way. Chinese, 2,500 troops. The Chinese aren't really pushing or preparing for war. They are trying to pull out. You can tell this because there are no Chinese troops arriving while this is going on. There are tons more Japanese arriving, but there are no Chinese arriving. And the Chinese are a lot closer. Yes, you could say they're relying on that distance to get them in there quicker at the end, but they're not. They're pulling out. On the 26th of June, Otori, not the ambassador of, or minister or the representative of Japan to Korea, the guy who's in charge of the troops that the Japanese have sent to Korea, even though they weren't requested to send them, they weren't asked for them, they turned up, presents a set of reform proposals to the King Gojong. The proposals. Now, here's the thing. All these proposals are theoretically dressed up as going, this is make Korea more open to international investment and trade, so you have to do it because we have an army. And all of them actually sum up as, we want to turn Korea into Japan's vassal state, and we want you to disband your local army and only have troops we train and we provide, and only have our troops there, and you must kick the Chinese out. It's fun. The joy of a civil war in a country surrounded by larger powers. Locals always assume a local will remain in power at the end. Pity no one else does. Yeah, it's fun times. Anyway, so on the 7th of July, the British ambassador to China tries to mediate between the Chinese and the Japanese. Because believe it or not, the British don't actually want a war. What the British want is a situation where both sides are rapidly rearming so they can sell them weapons, but they still have free and easy access for trade. Did I say that aloud? They don't really want that. No one's that cynical, that nasty. But that is probably the best outcome for the British from a financial and political perspective. It also keeps them both completely focused on each other and not worry about what Britain's doing. On 19th of July, 1894, the Japanese established a combined fleet. All the Navy is formed up under one commander. And Mutsu, remember that lovely, lovely gentleman, the Japanese foreign minister, cables Atari, the Japanese military commander in Korea, to take any necessary steps to compel the Korean government to carry out a reform program. Well, it's lovely if you find it in a telegram, but when did it become the scenario that you send in troops in this period to enforce a reform program? And even today, sending in troops to enforce a reform program would be considered a bit strange. In fact, no one really would do it. It's not really a reform program. And so, on the 23rd of July, to compel this, the Japanese troops occupy Seoul, capture Gojong, and establish a new pro-Japanese government, which terminates all Sino-Korean treaties and grants the Imperial Japanese Army the right to expel the Qing Empire's Beiyang army from Korea. That escalated fast for the Chinese. They're going, what the frick's happened? This is one of those scenarios where you look at it and go, yeah, someone had a plan from the beginning. That's good. The clock. It was fun. Narrator. It was most likely not fun. It was fun if you weren't involved. And I'm thinking, arms trade is trade. It only becomes logistics if someone objects. True. So this is when you have war. But I would argue one party has been at war from the beginning, because, in the nicest way, this is something China has done dozens and dozens of times in the past. There's been issues in Korea, they've deployed a small number of troops, it's been sorted. The Japanese are turning up with overwhelming numbers of troops. So, the thing is, by July 1894, see, this is why my typing is wrong. Chinese forces, I will have to fix that. Lovely typo there. Yeah, regime changes and enforce reform program. Yeah, that's what we'll call it. Chinese forces in Korea number between 3,000 to 3,500 troops, but they're outnumbered by the Japanese, who have some region of 6,500 to 8,000 troops. There are various reports around them. There are some reports which are lower than that, but once you start looking at all the numbers being deployed elsewhere and appearing here, there. The thing is, both sides tend to go, it's Korean forces fighting this battle, which can make it difficult to work out how many numbers of actual troops are there. Now, both sides have significant Korean forces. Everything really depends upon Asan Bay. If the Beiyang fleet can keep up convoys and all those sort of things, then it could go well. If the Japanese fleets could stop this, then we have problems. And this leads us to the Battle of Pungdo. Now, why is this important? Because this battle the Chinese lose. And if the Chinese had won this, you would have had about... How do I put this politely? Well, let's put it this way. A lot of very good soldiers would have got to where they were supposed to go. The Japanese deploy 3 protected cruisers and get 1 protected cruiser damaged. The Chinese deploy a protected cruiser, 2 gunboats, and a transport ship. The transport ship is carrying about 1,000. Well, let's say no. Right. On the 25th of June, Chinese had deployed roughly 400 extra troops to Korea. And they were sent from the command of Yizinshao in Asan, which is 70 kilometers or 43 miles from Seoul. They were sent to Asan. Now, slowly, well, how do I put this? There are other troops sent out to him. And the idea is that they want to reinforce his forces in Asan, the force in Asan, with a further 2,500 troops, give him a full brigade, because that place is only 43 miles from Seoul, and it's a key point to defend. The key vessel that's destroyed is the Kuoxing. Now, there are Chinese vessels which are deployed in all those things, but the Kuoxing matters. Why? Because the captain is an Englishman called Thomas Ryder Goldsworthy, and it's a British-owned ship. It was temporarily chartered by the Chinese government, and they didn't realize there'd been a battle at Pudong and the Chinese had lost. He was under the protection of a British civil ensign. At approximately, I think it's 9 a.m. on the 25th of July. Yeah. 9 a.m. on the 25th of July. So, if we go back to our previous slide, 2 days after the Japanese troops occupy Seoul, the Kuoxing is ordered to follow the Japanese cruiser Nanwa to the main Japanese squadron. After a formal protest citing the neutrality British flag, Captain Goldsworthy agrees. However, the Chinese soldiers on board objected and threatened to kill the crew unless Goldsworthy took them back to China. After 4 hours of negotiation, when the Beiyang troops were momentarily distracted, Goldsworthy and the British crew jumped overboard and attempted to swim to Nanwa. Unfortunately, they're then fired upon by the Chinese. Most of the sailors are killed, but Goldsworthy and 2 crew are rescued by the Japanese. Nanwa then opens up on a Kuoxing and sinking her and the troops on board. A few, including the German military advisor, Major Constantine van Hanneken, escaped by swimming and were rescued by local fishermen. They lost, the Chinese casualties were approximately 1,100, including the 800 troops lost on the Kuoxing alone in this battle, and those 800 troops were some of the best trained troops they had for that force. They were critical troops, and of course they lost some of their key advisors. It's not a good battle if you're the Chinese. Overwhelming numbers of troops is not an easy thing to arrange. One wonders how long in advance the Japanese organised. They're interesting. The thing was, he thought the Japanese would not fire on him because of the red ensign. And then, what were the Russians doing? Would they allow the Chinese to transfer Manchuria? Oh, yes, they would. It was still technically China. It was under Russian influence, but it was still technically China. Besides, if the Chinese are beating up the Japanese, that allows the Russians to expand their influence at the expense of the Japanese. At what point were swimming abilities deemed necessary to be a sailor on a European vessel? Still being argued about in World War One. And World War Two, actually. That's good, but at this moment the Russians are busy putting down a large number of mutinies and results. Yeah, they have lots of fun going on. It is Mother Russia. They have issues. So, now we have the land battles. Sewan and Pyongyang. And please note, this picture is taken and it shows Korean soldiers standing over Chinese prisoners. That's what all the marketing of it says. And you have no argument whether that's true or not. Without doubt, that probably is true. But there's a lot of similarities going on. And if you notice, there are some persons in the background who are wearing very similar hats, as if they might also be Korean soldiers. Who knows? And so it might be Korean soldiers standing over Korean, because the Japanese tried to very much present this as Korean soldiers versus Chinese invaders. Now, at this point, commissioned by the new pro-Japanese Korean government to forcibly expel Chinese forces, 25th of July, again, same day, 2 days after it's been the government's been formed, Major General Oshima Yoshimiso, who is a major general in the Japanese army and has just happened to arrive, leads a mixed brigade of at least 4,000 troops marching from Seoul south towards Asan Bay to try and take the Chinese troops garrisoned at Seong Station east of Asan. These are the troops who are in this position, who would have been reinforced by the troops which were sunk on the Kuoxing. So that's the thing. They're charging towards to fight them, and those troops have already lost their reinforcements. Units of the Chinese main force were deployed east and northeast of the Asan, near the main road leading to Seoul. The key positions held by Chinese were the towns of Seongwanan and Shonan. Approximately 3,000 troops were stationed at Seongwanan, whilst 1,000, along with General Yi Xingchao, as headquarters, were at Shonan. And the remaining Chinese troops were stationed at Asan. These were a mixture of Chinese soldiers. They had roughly 2,900 Chinese soldiers and Korean soldiers. The Chinese had been preparing for a pincer movement against the Korean capital by massing troops at Pyongyang north and Asan in the south. That's basically what they've been planning on doing. In the morning of 27th of July, the two forces met just outside Asan. Engagement lasted until 7:30 a.m. the following on the 28th. The battle began with a diversionary attack by the Japanese troops, followed by the main attack, which quickly outflanked the Chinese defenses. And Chinese troops, realizing they're being outflanked, decide they're going to leave their defensive positions And some people say flee towards the direction of Asan, but actually I would say, considering what happens to the Japanese and considering the numbers of the Japanese versus them, they do fight a rearguard action quite successfully and eventually withdraw towards Pyongyang, abandoning apparently arms and ammunition and all its artillery. Now, troops often retreating abandon artillery. The Japanese, taking the city of Asan in 29th, managed to break what is considered the Chinese encirclement of Seoul. And the Chinese had suffered 500 killed and wounded, while the Japanese apparently suffered 88. Again, there is a lot of interesting things in that the Japanese don't appear to really start counting how many Korean soldiers they lose, whereas the Chinese, the count of the number of Chinese soldiers who are dead seems to include the number of Koreans who were fighting for them as well. So, it's an interesting time. Death Squad. Narrator. Dr. Clark's definition of fun is disputed. Hello, Stafford. The number of troops in this first battle are really low compared to later wars and battles. They are. And the Chinese are building trenches and all sorts of things for their defensive positions. They are just too few. And there is an honest argument where you can say if they'd had the 800 or so reinforcements they were supposed to have, that could have made a very big difference. Because those 800 troops were very solid troops, but also key, they were quite a lot of the troops who had, it's going to sound strange, the rapid-firing weapons. Now, machine guns are an interesting term, and so I tend to try and be careful about when I'm talking about them and the various ones which they start off. But you have the 1862 Gatling gun, and you have the various Maxim machine gun. And honestly, these were the troops which were carrying those. This is a big problem. If you can imagine, there is a dispute whether we're fairly sure they have some Gatling weapons of a kind. But there is also some people who say it's Maxims comes out in 1884. We know that China does have some Maxims, but are they sent with these troops? We're not quite sure. That's the honest thing. From the sources I say, they're not sure. But what I know is the troops who are there don't have the weapons they're supposed to have. So if they'd had Gatlings or even Maxims or even Gatlings, those defenses could have been very different from the Japanese perspective, who don't have a lot of heavy artillery with them and are relying on infantry. But it's not a fun time. Now, the Chinese slowly retreat up the peninsula to Korea, to Pyongyang. And by the 4th of August, there are about 13 to 15,000 troops, Korean and Chinese, in Pyongyang, hoping to check the Japanese advance. At this point, unfortunately for them, the Japanese Imperial Army managed to converge from several different directions using amphibious warfare. So the Japanese attack from the rear with artillery and infantry. And all sorts of different... It's a really nasty battle. Now, again, casualties are considered far higher for the Chinese, 2,000 killed and around 4,000 wounded. The Japanese casualties are totaled 102 men killed, 433 wounded, 33 missing. And on the 16th of September, 1894, the entire Japanese army enters Pyongyang. Again, don't take this the wrong way, but Japan has managed to produce the logistics, the manpower, the shipping, everything to get this war, you know, to get this war together very, very quickly. China is scrabbling, and Japan has everything. Hello, Yukas. Dirt Squad, yes, I managed to catch you out of that one. Cars, Gatlings, Maxims, maybe in 37mm Hotchkiss Gatling. I don't think they had a 37mm Hotchkiss Gatling with them. That's usually a ship weapon. They might have had a couple on their ships, but I doubt. I haven't seen any note of them. What I have seen is that some of their better trained troops who have these sort of equipment disappear at this point, and they're not appearing in the battles. And you would expect them to be there, and then some of the troops do turn up later on in other battles, but you'd expect them to that brigade's worth to be there because they send a brigade basically to Asan, as you can see from this yellow line going across, the yellow line going across like that. And no. Okay, so it's yeah, like that. The yellow line up there. You would expect if you're deploying a full brigade, you'd expect the brigade's machine gun crews, the brigade's artillery crew to get out there, and about less than half their artillery crew out there, less than none of their machine gun teams to be out there. That would suggest to me that they go down at sea. Or at least their equipment does. Discord, we find ourselves in opposition of agreeing with Dr. Clark on the definition of fun. We feel as uncomfortable as you do, valued audience. Thank you, Discord. It's not a good time to be in Korean. It's definitely not a good time to be Chinese. And then this happens, the Battle of Yalu River. In early September, Li Huzong decided to reinforce the Chinese force at Pyongyang by employing the Beiyang fleet to escort transports to the mouth of the Taedong River. The plan was to put an extra 4,500 troops from Zili. Now, initially, Admiral Ding, who's in charge of the battle of the Beiyang fleet, wanted to send the transports under a light escort of only a few ships, while the main force of the Beiyang fleet would locate and openly operate directly against a compliant fleet in order to prevent the Japanese from intercepting the convoy. But when Yoshino and Nanoa, on a reconnaissance sortie near Weihai spotted the convoy, the plans were thwarted. The Chinese mistook them for the main Japanese fleet. Consequently, on September 12th, the entire Beiyang fleet departed Dalian, heading for Weihai, arriving near the Shandong Peninsula the next day. Chinese warships spent the entire day cruising the area, waiting for the Japanese. There was no sighting on. So Admiral Ding decided to return to Dalian, reaching the port in the morning of September 15th. As Japanese troops moved north to attack Pyongyang, Admiral Ito correctly guessed that the Chinese would attempt to reinforce their army in Korea by sea. There's no other real option for them, is there? On the 4th of September, the combined fleet steamed northwards to research the Korean and Chinese coast in order to bring the Beiyang fleet to battle. When the Japanese are victorious at Pyongyang, the Chinese troops are pushed north to the Yellow River, in the process removing all effective Chinese military presence in the Korean peninsula. And the Korean troops who are loyal to King Gongjo versus loyal to his father. Shortly before the convoy is supposed to depart, Admiral Ding receives a message concerning the battle at Pyongyang, informing about defeat. Subsequently, it made the redeployment troops to the mouth of the Taedong River unnecessary. Admiral Ding then correctly assumed that the next Chinese line of defense would be established on the Yellow River, and decided to redeploy the embarked soldiers there. On September 16th, the convoy of 5 transport ships departed from Dalian Bay under the escort from the vessels of the Beiyang fleet, which included both the idle ships Daegan and Zhenhun. Reaching the mouth of the Yellow River, the transports disembarked the troops, and landing operation lasts until the following morning with no interruptions. On the 17th of September, the Japanese combined fleet encounters the Chinese Beiyang fleet at the mouth of the Yellow River. The naval battle lasts from late morning to dusk, results in a Japanese victory. This is despite the fact the Chinese had managed to land all their 4,500 troops. And whilst most of the rest of the fleet had fled, the fact is Ding Yang and Zhenyun were nearly out of ammunition, but were still fighting. The Imperial Japanese Navy destroyed 8 of the 10 Chinese warships. Mostly not that great of warships, let's be honest. They managed to destroy 1 protected cruiser, 1 armoured cruiser, 2 light cruisers, and 1 composite cruiser, which the latter is scuttled. Whereas they have 5 protected cruisers damaged and 1 ironclad damaged. It's one of those interesting scenarios where you're sitting there and looking at it and thinking, I don't think necessarily the Japanese win it as much as they think they do. Because apparently the victory shatters the morale of the Chinese naval forces and grants a major propaganda victory straight to the Japanese. This is not really the case, in my opinion. The Chinese, as has been said, don't necessarily realize they've lost. They landed 4,500 troops successfully in the face of enemy opposition, to their mind. And yes, they lost ships, but that's not the thing. They landed the troops. Hey, Killer 19. The thing is, the Japanese did have faster firing guns, which made a difference in a longer ongoing engagement. And it's one of those lessons which is going to come up again and again. It's always size, accuracy, size of, it's weight of shot, size of gun, whatever you want to call it, accuracy of shooting, and speed of shooting. It's sort of the triangle of naval firepower. I've seen purported video footage and actual photographs of battle taken from the Japanese CNC's armed merchant ship, Seika. Gongash, how wide is the Yellow River at the mouth? Is it a large estuary? It's fairly large. Let me just look it up. I'm sorry, my geography of the Yellow River is not the strongest thing, so I am just going to look it up. Basically, it's at the end, the Korean Bay end, and ooh, that is. Oh. Geography, you are a thankless. Right. And there is one easy way to look this up. Well, I think the battle takes place most of all in the Korean Bay area, so stretching from Zalau Island to Ka Island. I think it's a bearing, but you're talking about a river of about 20 kilometers across, or about probably 12 or so miles. I don't know, it seems a bit early for a video. I don't think we changed the clocks yet. If we have, that could explain why I keep waking up late. That's the 21st of March, isn't it? That's April. Can't remember. Leaf forward in the spring, isn't it? Gash, were the Japanese using their shells of accidental poison gas propellant at this stage? Not at this stage, necessarily. It was certainly a fun battle. Now, the war does go on after this, but it's going to sound strange. Once you've lost the Beiyang fleet, and as I said, they get mostly defeated. They lose a lot of ships here, but then they lose their battleships slowly. At this point, the Chinese are really on the back foot, and they're at the Yellow River. And here's the thing: if the Chinese had started deploying their full forces that they could deploy to the Yellow River, then I have no doubt the Japanese could have been pushed back. Honestly, if you consider the sheer amount of firepower the Chinese have, if they can afford to deploy them all. I've already told you, there's 3 armies which are off fighting elsewhere because they have to be. There are all sorts of armies and troops they can call on. If you could properly mobilize China at this point, you would be amazed at what would have been done. But they can't. Because of internal politics. Because there's all sorts of squabbles over who would be the general. And here's the thing. Korea is important to Japan because they supply the food to Japan. in real politics states, what's it supplying China? China has its own issues it's dealing with, its own problems. That's good. I think he means 1895 is early for a video. Yeah. Possibly. But let's be honest, I'm doing the Battle of Saints later on this month, so that's really going far back. And I'll be probably doing one. I've got a plan for one on the Quinca Marine and Deca Marine concept in June-ish time, probably, when all the books arrive. Assuming everyone changes daylight saving time on the same day, it's been almost 2 weeks. Possibly. You know, Chinese sailors were so fucked up they could... they actually mutinied to keep their ships intact, so they have something to offer the Japanese. There is all sorts of weird stuff spread around about them, but honestly, most of the Chinese sailors mutiny because, frankly, they don't like their officers anymore. There are good officers have a habit of committing suicide because they're ordered to, because they've had a reverse, and then they have idiots put in charge of them, and they just think, frankly, why am I getting killed for this load of monkeys? Basically, and that's and before anyone starts thinking of connotations here, there is an old saying, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. The Chinese army and Chinese navy seems to be, they have some very good officers and sailors at the beginning of the war. They don't seem to have good ones by midway through it. That's good. The likelihood the Japanese encouraged the various uprisings tying up most of the Chinese army? Oh, you don't say. As you say. The likelihood. The fact is they probably wouldn't have minded being involved in doing them, but odds are probably not. And I say this from a simple perspective. They don't need to. There are enough problems going on in China. They don't need to do anything. It's kind of like in World War I, when the Germans sent all sorts of messages and telegrams to Mexico about the Zimmerman stuff to try and start a war on America's southern border, and you sit there and go, why are you doing this? Honestly, if they hadn't, America would have probably not armed themselves. They wouldn't have started mobilizing their troops. They'd have been in a far worse position to actually get involved in the First World War. And when they had done, they'd have probably been far weaker, which could well have led to good old Maximilian deciding to invade South America anyway. He was a bit of a... I don't think there were cameras which could take usable film, as we would understand it, from the deck of a ship in 1895. Someone probably correct me, but I doubt it. Because historically it supplies security for Japan. Not at this point, really. The Japanese like to overstate their influence and security Korea provides them, but basically they just like having an empire. It's In the book, The Chinese Steam Navy, the author states the Chinese fleet reached peak efficiency and competence in 1890. By the time of war, there had been a decline in leadership and training. I would say at the beginning of the war, you still have the leadership. You don't have necessarily as much of the training, as they have been very complicated shooter trips, which are far more difficult to keep in order than they could have been if they'd gone for someone else to design and build them. So they're very intensive in terms of their maintenance. I'd say a lot of the leadership keeps coming, gets, you know, as I said, ends up committing suicide, which, again, I don't think is sensible. Thank you for posting a link to Discord, Jeff. So, at this point, the Japanese in October 1894 decided to successfully cross the Yellow River, so they're no longer in Korea. Okay? They're no longer. Once you cross the Yellow River, you're in China. Definitely. By a pontoon bridge, which they hastily erect. And on the 25th of October, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they assaulted the outpost of Hushan, east of Zhejiang. And at 8:30 that evening, defenders desert their positions, and by next day, they're in full retreat from Zhejiang. Which seems a bit strange, because if they desert their positions at 8:30, after 3.5 hours of fighting, why are they only in full retreat the next day? Because if you've deserted your position, surely you're heading home. At this point, the Japanese, General Yamada's First Army Corps decides to occupy the city of Dandong, and elements of the retreating Beiyang army set fire to the city of Fengsheng. And again, they're always going, there are losses of 4 killed and 140 wounded, versus the Chinese have thousands lost and killed. There is one which doesn't A, buy their low losses, and B, thinks that the Chinese losses might be being overstated a lot. The Japanese First Army Corps then split into 2 groups, with them advancing towards Mungden and Liedong, up the Liedong Peninsula, which of course there's now an aircraft carrier named for. And then they land the Second Army Corps at Liedong. And they lay siege to Lushenko, which of course is what becomes Port Arthur. So the Japanese had already laid siege to Port Arthur in 1894. And this is going on. The Japanese fleet eventually falls on being talked about a Weihai Way, and one of the interesting things is there is a complete, how do I put this? There is a complete revisionism history which comes out after this war. And one of the most interesting ones is there's this picture of Admiral Deng, apparently in full imperial garb, surrendering to these tall, magisterial-looking Japanese officers in modern Western garb. When in actual fact, Admiral Ding is dead by this point. It's entirely revisionist and very, well, let me give you an idea of some of the pictures you get. that come up. And this is the most commonly retreated one, and it's most commonly repeated one as well. It's basically, it just comes up everywhere, and I spend half my life with students whenever I'm talking about this war going, it's not real. Yeah. This is the supposed picture of the surrender. Please notice how the Japanese troops are dressed. Modern, Western. They look very, their sailors look very, and then the Chinese. And even the Western advisors of the Chinese look humbled and all sorts of things. It doesn't happen like that at all. Carmen, no, I haven't heard about the new £50 note. Fortunately, I haven't seen one yet. If someone's, it's always nice to have. Yeah. I used to, years ago, when I got paid my stipend, when I was a bachelor student, and you still got those things, I would give my rent money to my mum in £100 and £50 notes, because whenever she went to Sainsbury's, it made them look at her like it is. She said it made her feel like she was a drug dealer, the way they were looking at her. And I'm the sort of son who likes to wind up his mum. Vision, the earliest film of Navy ships is from the 1898 Spanish-American War, and this is the US fleet returning to New York. Early filmmakers did model battles from the Nickelodeon shorts of the film. Two of the Chinese cruisers were built by Armstrongs, do not forget. No! 2 were built by Armstrongs. They were the 2 actually cruisers which were best working, and if you look at it, are 2 of the ones which are actually doing a lot of sailing, doing a lot of the sailing by 1894. And there's a reason they fight as well as they do, and where some of their better officers come from. Tian, who would have thought that the man to turn China's fortunes around is the pointed 2-year-old baby somewhere in a village in human imprisonment? Not sure we'll go for that one. Make sure you differentiate between the Yellow River and the Yellow River. They are completely different rivers. That they are, yes, but I would say at this point, career ends at the Yellow River. At this point. Done. No, the carrier is named Liaoning. The peninsula is named Liantung. Then my notes are wrong. That's fine. That's me writing stuff down. He poisoned himself with morphine. Yeah, he was dead. He was definitely not there to surrender. Opium, not morphine, and just overdoses with opium. That's good. Off topic, how long do you think it'll take to clear the Suez Canal? That's a big ship to move. I'm sure they'll be working with it as fast as they can. Partially cleared, probably 2 to 3 days, maybe slightly longer. Depends. If they have to start lightening the load, it could be a full week. Because you have to get cranes in there that can lighten that load. And that's not going to be easy. If you can manage to float off the ship by just clearing the sides of the bank and float it off that way and turn it around, then you can maybe start ships passing it. It'll be tied off to one side of the bank. So that'll limit it. Yep. Discord, you should try paying $2,500 into an account in £50 notes. I go to ask, but I'm sure they were fought. Yeah.
half the time the manager would have to come over to verify the notes. Oh, I'm such a cruel son. I really am.
In Tijuana, opium, morphine, same thing. Not really. Okay, I know potentially, but I know morphine comes from opium, but they are different. They have a relief channel open, but it's restricted on what side. Yes, but they have the relief channel because they're using the old. They're using the old canal. This is the thing. It happened in the bit where they widened and put in a new canal. So now that's the Suez Max. And now they're having to go down to the old Suez. Okay, so that can take the older ships. And the trouble is, there aren't many of those ships going around the world at the moment. So they're all Suez Max or Panamax. And, yeah. Morphine is the active ingredient in opium. Eric Allen, I am a chemist. Yeah. I'm Dr. Cuffin. Yeah, we don't have... we are missing one person this evening. If we had Dan on here, he'd be telling us off if we were calling them the same things. So, it's not a good war. It's, but I would say, in the nicest way, I don't consider Korea at this point, in parts, definitely not a feudal society. In parts, it's they're using the cloak of the traditional feudal society to cover up what is a very modern power grab. And I honestly don't think he ever really realizes that he can't control the Japanese. He brings the Japanese in. Yusung Dawano, if he didn't make it viable for the Chinese to get in, the Japanese to get in, I don't think they'd have got a foothold they did. Well, if they had, they'd have been facing a lot more troops to fight them. So, you know, it's interesting. But Dan would tell us off very politely. Yes, he would. Hello, Eric. Anyway, China and Korea are both pre-industrial societies. I would say they are industrializing societies. They're not pre-industrial because they're using industrial war and they are starting to industrialize. They're just not industrialized at this point. But they are definitely starting it. You know, the Chinese arsenals are vast, but they are starting them up and they're just getting them going. And it takes time. And it's complicated because you have to retrain everyone from every step up. And one of the interesting things, okay, in the 1930s, Britain has tremendous trouble getting its shipyards to change from riveting to welding. Basically takes World War II for it to do. In America, they have the same issues. In World War II, though, what happens is they open up so many new yards between 1939 and 1941. Those new yards, everyone's trained to do welding more than riveting. And then they can turn around to the older yards and go, well, if you can't produce as quickly, you're not going to get money. And that's how they produce or get the welding in. So, and that's in supposedly, for their time, modern industrialized societies, which are going to. So I don't consider it a sign of some of my colleagues. I would call it the less advanced, more agrarian culture and all sort of things. No, just people don't like to have to change. People like, a vast majority of people like to be able to go to their job, do their job without thinking, get paid, and then go and concentrate on things which they enjoy in life, which won't pay them money to live. They don't want to have to, oh, I have to reskill, upskill. So, I said, I'd call them industrializing. Imagine semi-industrialized. Not quite sure they're that far down the line. China, maybe. Korea industrializing. Hello, Tom. Dr. Padalano used to bring this war up, as well as the Sino-French War, as an example of Pacific sea power involving more than just Britain and America. Interesting battles between somewhat ramshackle fleets. Yes. He does enjoy having that conversation with people. I know, because I used to have to teach on the run some of the seminars on it when I was a PhD student. China didn't successfully industrialize until the Mao era. The Qing Empire was trying to industrialize and failed. Okay, I would say as a whole nation, you are right. But I would say that there is a reason Japan is focusing on places like Shanghai, etc. in the Second Sino-Japanese War, and that's because those are the centers of industrialization. Those are where there are factories. Those are where there are ironworks and these sort of things. So the thing is, China is getting there. It's starting to have the quite good, quite capable pockets in the 1920s. And it's been, for its time, they are trying to get them in the 1890s. They get some in the 1900s, and they're slowly pushing them up and getting equivalent ones to Japan, definitely, in the 1920s. In these sort of pockets, these areas, and it's slowly starting to work out. But the thing is, then the Second Sino-Japanese War happens, and all those facilities, all those things, China doesn't have the central government at that point, which can organize a mass retreat behind the mountains to the whole of, pull everything back inland to Western China. No, like the Soviets do behind, put on the other side of the Urals and just go, right, you want to get our industry? Come and get it. And the Germans are going, we don't have logistics that long. Our whole thing was based on a quick war. They've moved everything the other side of the Urals. Literally, everything's the other side of the Urals. You want to go through those mountains? Have fun. You've got like one railway line running that way. And German logistics in World War II is entirely train-based. They have, well, no, they also have horse and cart. They have a few lorries, but trains are the vital beating heart of their logistics effort. The Chinese movie emphasizes the role of the cowardly Chinese flagship captain who messes up the formation from the two parallel columns line ahead to line abreast to make his ship harder to hit. I don't really agree with anyone doing that. And also, nicest way, those ships were hard enough to steer as it was. Ramshackle improvised warships give birth to interesting results sometimes, some not. Yeah. What time is Armchair Admirals? I think it's about 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. China does successfully manufacture unarmored cruisers before 1894 and after they build torpedo boats. Yeah, there is industry going on there. Actually, the second oldest Chinese ship, two oldest Chinese ships are Armstrong built, as well as, well, so 4 Armstrong ships. Trouble is, again, you have the different navies and you don't have a unified structure. The thing, what China really needed to do was have a unified command structure. And they don't. Armchair Admirals on this week is 8 p.m. Central European Time, and it's on the Battle of Matapan, and I think we have Jamie joining us. Trentalenko, the Japanese expeditionary force in China was armed with Chinese-built weapons and ammunition in World War II. Are we pre-torpedo boat? That's right. You're at the beginning of the torpedo boat era. If we knew the kids weren't watching, alive on historical situations where the initial response is a string of creative profanity. Something. Tianong. Mao's one. Actually, no. Actually, Mao learns from Chiang Kai-shek, who actually does implement the unified command structures under Kuomintang, and that's Chiang Kai-shek's real gift to China. But the trouble is, Chiang Kai-shek is not as good at knowing who to trust and who not to trust, whereas Mao is very good at building a cadre of people who he trusts, implementing a similar command structure, and then using it. But that is completely off topic. Chandlangan, US Army forces in Korean War saw Chinese armed with Chinese-produced Japanese weapons. Yeah, there are factories in China producing weapons for the Japanese. The Japanese army runs them, and they are not nice places for the Chinese to be in, but they are there. But Jamie has a thing with Matapan. I'm not sure. I think it's mainly HMS Furious, not Furious. HMS Formidable, and her being quite so slow to turn out of the firing line. And the thing is, most of those Japanese factories were built in former Chinese factories, which have been producing other things. So the Japanese didn't actually build quite a lot of those factories. They took them over from the Chinese and just repurposed them, added in new equipment. Chinese torpedo boat threat. It's one reason the Japanese break off the action at dusk. They had about 6 in total. So, how much does the Vietnamese Navy compare to the Chinese and Japanese navies of the 18th and 19th century? Doesn't really exist. At this point, there isn't really much of a Vietnamese Navy, as we were discussing when talking about the South China Sea on Bill Trump's the other night. Right? Anyway, what have I got coming up? It's almost 10 o'clock, so I will try and pack up. We have Armchair Admirals, Battle of Matapan tomorrow. We have Brew Ships 43, Aircraft Carriers and Naval Aviation on the 28th. Minotaur and Tiger class cruisers on the 2nd of April. 4th of April, Brew Ships 44 Strategy. 9th of April, the Battle of the Saints. And 11th of April, Brew Ships 45. Something medieval. And let's see, what else we got in terms of long patrols? Mindsaw class cruisers, Tiger class cruisers, Monitors of the Royal Navy, Section 3, K class submarines on the 30th of April, Dreadnoughts from around the world on the 20th of April, and 27th of April, extended Patreon 20, because, as I said, I've done parts 1 and 2. I did 4 parts and went, hang on, there are 30 slides here, I'm never going to get through them all. So I'm doing them as a long patrol for the 27th of April. So, thank you, everyone. I'm going to take a couple of questions and then I'm going to call it a night because, well, I'm hungry. I haven't had lunch yet today. Dirt Squad. Cunningham, look, please, at least sit behind one of the battleships. HMS Swindle. I am sat behind one of them. I'm following at a reasonable distance. Cunningham, not what I meant. Yeah. Well, we do have 4.5-inch general purpose guns. Why are you giving us general purpose? Rampant Razorback, taking suggestions for Bruce 46. I think I'm going to be, but I'll take it. I'll have them on Sunday, sort of thing. Maybe I know. Teng Sif Shang died commanding the Chinese cruiser Xing Armstrong built, you know. Zekro Xiong was constructed in 2014 at the port of Danong, while the wreck was when the wreck was discovered in 2013 after a 16-year search. Cool. Tom Gordon, sorry to be a pain. No, that's not a pain, and I've seen it, but I haven't responded to it. I do apologise. I thought I had responded to it. I've been having a bit of an issue recently. I had lots and lots of messages. It's dissertation time. So those of us who know what it's like in academia when all the students are handing their dissertation know that I am not really sleeping much and dealing with a lot of people sending me messages. But I will get back to you, Tom. Don't worry. Okay, that's a hotel ship. Say bon nuit. Right, thank you very much to everyone to watch. I hope you've enjoyed it. Dirt Squad, a explanation from Bill. If Warspite can act like a destroyer, so can I. Yeah, broadly speaking. Thank you, Trentelenko. Thank you, Albazaski. Thank you, everyone. And thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do enjoy it, please like, maybe subscribe. If you want to support my very, very excessive book habit, please always consider Patreon. And if you want to carry on the conversation, there is always Discord. Thank you, DGB40. Vision, what about Philip McGiffin, USN officer on the Chinese flagship? I think Philip McGiffin probably deserves a whole video at some point about his life story. Take care, Carl Gasso, thank you. And Rapper Roseback, thank you. Roland Cash, thank you. Vision, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. And if I do that, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tom Golding. Thank you, Derp Scott. Thank you, Roland Cash. Sorry for knocking a Russian accent. Do not worry. It's not the greatest Russian accent. Do not worry. Do not worry. Thank you, Matthias Slavic. Thank you, Stephen White. Thank you, Karl Gasberg. Thank you, Tien Wong and Daniel Sozatsky. Thank you. It probably is a bad enough accent that Putin will want to kill me just for the accent. But you know, we like it all. It's Clark. Bring news. There's a remastered edition of Rome Total War Away. Woo! We can always hope with that one. Take care. Take care, everyone. Thank you. And thank you again to everyone for watching our way through. Thank you. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Jeff Beeler. Thank you, Carl Hausberg. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ray Sassy. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to the wives who've been watching and helping, and to the One of those, at least one husband who's been watching and helping, and significant others who've been watching and helping. Thank you, everyone. It's been nice to know you all been there. Take care. I'm glad this is better than Sean Connery's in Red October, because that really is not setting a high bar. But, you know, thank you, thank you. I think I sound a bit like the Count from Sesame Street. But, you know, I'm trying for Russian. I am trying.